Oh no, I want to. Hello.
Hello.
I'm going to
Hello,
try
Joe.
something very interesting. I'm going to put reclaim host, and I wonder if that allows me to record. And let's see if that works. A second. No, it doesn't. It just
The
allows me to.
recording is already running, so I'm not sure it would
Yeah.
stop and start without more buttons.
No, it's fine. Um, okay. Very good. Right. Very good.
Best
Okay.
part of this being recorded is we get to record for posterity your familiarity with technology, Daniel.
Yes. Absolutely. Thank you very much, Gideon Gabriel with aircon. Um, Right. Let me. We never waste any time here. We never joke around. So I'm going to start the show. Uh, Here we go. It took me years of COVID to learn how to do that, Gideon. You should know. Um, right. Okay. So we are in the middle of. I have to say we made a rough start last time to personal growth. So this is where it gets a little bit more personal. Everything we've done, meaning we talked all the way. Do you remember from the beginning about Emuna and about Hashem existing and about what bitachon is and about davening and about good things happening to bad people and vice versa and about tests and about challenges and about free will and about all of that. Yeah. Reward and punishment, next world, purpose. We do all of that. Now we're getting a bit closer to home, which are keys to growth or strategies for growth. So let's go. The last time we asked around, meaning around our hallowed circle, what is the key perspective or hindrance, positive or negative, towards growth? Right? What is the thing that holds us back? And we mentioned last time, it's what we finished with, was that you have to see yourself as a good person. And you have to see yourself as someone who is able to achieve growth because you are worthy of it and you can do it. Otherwise, it doesn't really happen. Right? I don't know if I told you last week, but the parable is often a scratched car. Yeah. A lot of cars in Israel certainly scratched. Cars hug each other to say hello. What I mean by that is that if you see yourself as damaged goods or whatever, then you will behave like damaged goods. Whereas if you see yourself as pristine, even if you picked up a couple of scratches along the way, then you will behave like someone who deserves to be pristine and still work towards that. Yeah?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to go through a couple of sources on that, which I think they're actually quite powerful, and I'm not sure why they're not discussed a little bit more. So here's an interesting thing. So I'll give you the context over here. The context is the Rambam in Hilchas Gerushin. So it's the Rambam in the Laws of Divorce. Just to cut a bit of halachic background here, a divorce get has to be given willingly. It can't be forced, otherwise it's invalid. Now, on the other hand, we do often apply a little bit of force to encourage the process to go through. Right? And in fact, it's not the only area of halacha in which this happens. There's another area of halacha in Karbonos, whereby it says Adam ki yakriv mikem karban, Adam ki yakriv karban mikem. I can't remember, sorry, but you have to give a karban, a sacrifice, willingly. Yet, in certain circumstances, we will force you to give that karban. So how do you put these things? How do you put these concepts together? Right. So the Gemara asked the question, and the Gemara says, "Well, what's the problem? We force a person to do it until he says, 'I want.'" Right. So that's a little bit like a parent telling a child, "You have to visit your grandparents, and you have to want to visit your grandparents. Otherwise, I will take all your pocket money forever." Right? That doesn't tend to engender this wellspring of willingness. Right. So what exactly is the idea? How on the one hand can we force you until you say you want, and yet we genuinely understand that you really want? So the Rambam has an amazing formulation here. He says like this: Ein omrim onus. I'm going to read it in the Hebrew. Actually, it's much better. We only invoke the principle that someone is coerced. Ela lemi shenilchatz. I'm just moving across the screen. Shenilchatz v'nidchak la'asos davar she'ena mechuyev bo min haTorah la'asosa. When do we claim that someone is coerced and forced against their will, and therefore it's not an expression of who they really are? That's when you are forced to do something which is not a mitzvah. It's just a kind of permissible act, which is not a mitzvah at all. The Torah never told you to do it. Kagon, for example, Misha Hukah, Ad Shemachar, Ad Shenasa. So the halacha is, if I go into your shop or your house and I say, sell me this item, and you say, absolutely not. And I say, sell me this item, you say, absolutely not. And then I brandish some form of weapon, yeah? And I say, are you sure you don't want me to sell you? You don't want to sell me that item, right? And the guy says, well, actually, I've changed my mind. Funny you say that, but the sharpness of your blade has encouraged me to change my mind, right? That is not a sale. That is coercion. That's not a sale. Conditions apply. Aval misha takva yitzra hara. But if you've got a mitzvah in play and you're refusing to do the mitzvah because, here's the line, your yetzer hara has conquered you or has taken over, your evil inclination has been tokef, which means it's strong, it has grabbed you, levatel mitzvah, and it has told you not to do a mitzvah, right? It's got hold of you and said, don't do the mitzvah, not worth it. Olasa savera, or even worse, it's told you to actually proactively perform an aveira sin. The hooker, and then there's a little bit of pressure, and you are pressurized into doing something that you are obligated to do to begin with, or until you have distanced yourself from something that you're forbidden to do. It's an amazing thing. That is not called coercion. That's called removing the thing that has coerced you to begin with. Right. So let me try and give this some illustration. And this might be a bit graphic, and I'm sorry if this is a little bit jarring, but I've got to talk about it. And that is teenagers waking up in the morning. Anyone who's ever had to get a teenager up in the morning will know it is tremendously difficult. In fact, it is a job that no one wants, neither you nor your teenager, right? But what happens eventually, upon revival of the dead, they kind of in zombie fashion make their way hopefully towards a bathroom, and slowly, kind of slower than the curvature of the earth, the rotation, they slowly get up. Now they might say, and this is from experience, please correct me if I'm wrong, they might say a few choice words to you in the meantime. Something like the Yiddish equivalent of good morning, just with a few expletives, quite possibly. But what you are doing at that glorious moment that everyone wants to be present for is you are basically bringing them back to what I would call free will. In other words, they want to sleep. And it doesn't matter that they've had 12 hours already. They want to sleep. They want to sleep. What you are doing is applying a little bit of force just to get them in a position where they can actually make the decision to properly wake up. Right? In other words, just in the Rambam form, you're not forcing them to get up. You're, on the contrary, you're removing the thing that's forcing them to sleep. Everyone get the distinction here? And by the way, this will happen in international relations and wars the whole time. The Iran war was full of that, right? How can you have an American force coming in and dictating what the country should be like, etc.? You can add any given dictatorship into that, equation. How can you have a democracy, fighting for the rights of people oppressed under dictatorship? It's not fair, right? And the answer is, well, of course it's fair, because who is the oppressor and who are the oppressed? Right? The oppressed are the people who have been oppressed by the dictatorship to begin with. So removing the dictatorship, right? Assuming that the dictatorship are bad for the people, let's assume that. Probably quite right. Yeah. If the dictatorship are bad for the people, then removing the dictatorship is not oppression. On the contrary, the dictatorship to begin with was the oppression. Right? So the Rambam is saying the same over here. It depends on the starting point. Right? If you force someone to do a mitzvah, right? And again, I don't mean that you kind of grab them and handcuff them to the lulav, right? I mean, you force someone to do a mitzvah, meaning you kind of apply a bit of pressure so they do this mitzvah. Yeah. So that is not considered coercion. It's not considered a lack of willing, right? On the contrary, that is considered willing. Yeah. We're good with that? Why? Because deep down, a person wants to do good. Right? Deep down, a person wants to do good, right? What's happening is when they're asleep in the morning, or whatever it is, they're not doing a mitzvah, right? Then they have allowed something to force them away from their natural inclination to do good. You're allowed to then force that away from them. But that itself
that's like one idea from Paro, with almost in reverse, the other side of the coin, when Hashem hardens Paro's heart in order to make him be in a position where he can exercise his free will. It's the other side of the same coin, right?
Yes, 100%. Yeah, 100%. Very, very good. Yeah, 100%. In other words, sometimes when you've got clarity that's so overbearing, you have to strengthen the other side to maintain free will. Whereas this is example the other way. When you've got a lack of clarity that's so overbearing, you have to beat it out, so to speak, to facilitate free will. Yeah, 100%. 100%. Very good. Okay. But again, the starting point is that we view everyone as pure inside. Right? Given that so, and their natural, if you like, if you have no pressure on them whatsoever, their natural calling would be, I want to do good. Right? But the things that are suppressing that's a problem. Okay, makes sense? Great, okay. But again, the point is, and it's a key to growth, this naturally we want to do good. We see ourselves as good, and naturally we want to do good. Okay, we continue. There's a couple of choice lines from the Rambam Hilchos Tshuva. I'm going to give you two now, even though one is only on the screen. Only one is on the screen. The Rambam says like this, very fascinating line, Kol Adam roi lo lios tzaddik k'Moshe Rabbeinu. Anyone is capable of being a tzaddik like Moshe Rabbeinu. Right? Interesting, right? It's Parshas Bamidbar, or Chumash Bamidbar, is in many ways, even though Devarim is his final speech, but Bamidbar is, for all intents and purposes, the greatness of Moshe. The truth is actually Shmos as well, to be honest. But how Moshe dealt with various particularly difficult national instances. Right, whether it was the spies, whether there's etc. Korach rebellion, etc. This week is a very difficult one, hitting the rock. But if this line is anyone is capable of being a tzaddik like Moshe, that's quite telling. Yeah, it's tremendously telling. Yeah, tzaddik like Moshe, that's remarkable. It really is. What that means is, and I put it in the footnote here, it's not that you can be as righteous as him. He was given special powers. In fact, if you want true disclosure, both the Ran in his droshes and the Malbim in his commentary on the Torah say that Moshe was, no, not Malbim, the Tziv, sorry, say that Moshe was purposefully given almost prophetic potential superpowers because at that point the people needed to be taken out of Egypt. In other words, that juncture in history necessitated a leader on a gigantically high level. That's why the Torah can emphatically say, Lo kam navi k'Moshe od. We sing it in Yigdal. There's never going to be another prophet like Moshe. Why is there never going to be another prophet like Moshe? Very simply because Moshe didn't just work on himself and become Moshe. Moshe was given the kind of unprecedented raw talent to be the highest prophet that can ever be. And that was a once in history thing. Could be Mashiach, whatever, but that's a once in history thing.
And what about Bilam? Did he not have a similar level?
Yes, there's a bit of a machlokes, good topical in the parasha, good. According to some, he may have, but again, that was given to him on a plate and he ruined it.
Haven't you just disproven yourself there? He said in the first, say anyone's capable of being a tzaddik like Moshe, but then he only comes around once in a lifetime, once in a...
Oh, very good. So that's the footnote here. Excellent, right? So there's two things over here. Number one is you can be a tzaddik like Moshe. Anyone can be a tzaddik like Moshe, not a prophet like Moshe. Right? Prophetic level is capped. But also number two is what they say it means over here is that you can be a tzaddik like Moshe, meaning just as he used every ounce of his being and his potential to become the highest Moshe he could be, so too we can in our own ways be the highest us we can be. In that way, we'll be parallel to Moshe. He was called an Eved Hashem, that's the Torah phrase, servant of Hashem, because he used every ounce of his fiber to serve Hashem. Yeah, so it doesn't mean we'll hit a parallel spiritual level in terms of objectivity. We're not going to go up a mountain in front of 3 million people and give people the Torah like Moshe did. We're not going to lead the nation out of Egypt like Moshe did. We're not going to split the sea like Moshe did, right? But what it does mean is we're going to use up our, not use up, we're going to reach, we can reach our potential in the same way like Moshe did.
Okay.
Yeah? Okay. Right. There is a Chovas HaLevavos here. It's an amazing Chovas HaLevavos. We'll quickly finish with this one. He says, Hasheni, these are the principles. He's talking about principles in various different areas of Jewish thought. He says that you have to understand that mankind is a miniature world. Right, not the chocolates, yeah, a miniature world, meaning we encompass the spiritual secrets of the world, and we are the focal point of the world. Through mankind, the world, its beauty and perfection were completed. Remember, we were created last, right? We're the last to be created, and we perfect and complete the world. But again, that's part of knowing. It's really a separate point, which we'll have to pick up on next week. Not only are we good internally, right? But there is a greater level here, which is, and given our goodness, we can radiate or we can shine to then light up the world. We're not going to get into all the stars and something like last week, Gideon, but that's we're going to have to focus on that a little bit next week.
Isn't it fair to say that actually Shabbat was the last thing that was created in the world?
Yeah, but Shabbat doesn't have its own independent spiritual purpose. It's for us, so to speak. Shabbat wouldn't have been created without any Jews being around, without anyone to access that. Yeah? Okay, I feel bad. I've got to run a little bit early, as warned. Please God, next week we'll go back to normal, which means next week you've only got 2 more until our summer break, it looks like. Oy vey, I hear you say. Oy vey, I hear you say. Okay, right. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to rush to my bar mitzvah.
Enjoy the bar mitzvah. Mazel tov. Enjoy the food.
Oh, thank you very much. The drink.